All right, moving into the developments centered around week 4, it would start off with some pretty crushing news for Patriots defensive coordinator Terrell Williams. I think I reported in one of the last videos that he had spent time away from the team because he was dealing with a medical condition. But he would receive an official diagnosis on September 26th per reports, and it stated that he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. It's highly unfortunate, and I don't know if there was an update on whether or not he's going to be continuing to spend time around the team. I would believe that they would want him to take a leave of absence and do as best as he can to get the help he would need in this time. I think that would be pretty logical. Like, you don't want to have that condition get any worse. So I don't necessarily know at what stage they caught this specific cancer at. But, I mean, hey, at least, even if I don't know the timing, it's important to know that they caught it before it might have been way too late for them to do anything about it. That's the most important thing. So, hopefully, he can beat this. I'm sure he's going to have a ton of support behind him. He would not be the only member or staffer of a team to be diagnosed with cancer, though, because just, like, it's pretty wild stuff. So, just make sure. A few days back as well, Giants owner John Mara would also announced that he was diagnosed with cancer. I don't think he alluded to it being a specific type, but regardless, it is a huge situation whenever that is bestowed upon you. Truly unfortunate situation. Now, he did say that he was going to continue to be around the team, but of course he's also going to have to spend time away as well whenever they aren't active to ensure that he gets the proper care that he would need as well. So I don't know, the fact that that happened multiple times in the span of a week is honestly pretty weird. But again, hopefully those guys have enough in them to overcome those things. I guess just to tie it in, yesterday they would mention that Skip Peete, Cardinals staffer, would also have a medical episode and would be taken out of practice. Yeah, Bucs running back coach. Said apparently Todd Bowles mentioned that he was dehydrated. You would hope that it's just that and nothing worse, especially given what I just talked about. Man. And then, in what could possibly, aside from all the other injuries, be considered as the most pressing development here, we have a follow-up officially on the Midtown Manhattan shooting that took place at NFL headquarters. As I mentioned when that initially happened, covering this story, Shane Devin Tamura, the assailant, if you will, in this situation, did have a note that was found on, his possession later on, after the entire thing took place and it was made out to be a crime scene. They found a note on him that essentially blamed the NFL or targeted the NFL and alluded to the fact that he wanted them to get his brain checked for potential CTE because he thought that he had acquired the symptoms. And again, the only way you can truly know whether or not a person had CTE in their lifetime is when they are dead and their brain is taken into a lab for examination that way. Unfortunately, we know what Tamura did, as he would take the lives of 4 people, and I think they did have the other identities, because I mentioned 3. I know I mentioned 3, and then in the initial report, some of the names just weren't outlined for some reason. But as of September 26th, we do have a little bit, I guess, of clarity on what actually might have been going on when it relates to that condition in Tamura's head. Because as this article and others would state here, Tamura did in fact have symptoms of CTE. Now, as the specific quote says here from this New York Times article from Belson and Marcius, quote, "The medical examiner found unambiguous diagnostic evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, in the brain tissue of the decedent," according to a statement. "The findings correspond with the classification of low-stage CTE according to current consensus criteria," end quote. Now, again, I'm no doctor, so I can't necessarily attest to this, but I would assume that when you're dealing with something low stage, the symptoms could be a lot less severe compared to some of the most infamous cases, shall we say, of people, former athletes in general, having this condition in even more intense stages that you would typically see in older individuals. Yet, with a condition like CTE, to attribute the label of low stage to it, it's still going to have a lot of adverse effects on the person that has it. Like, you're still going to go through your life even if you don't necessarily know for sure that you have it. Your ability to function is certainly going to be hindered. You're certainly going to be feeling a ton of mood swings if you're dealing with stuff like that after taking these repeated hits to the head over and over and over again. And naturally, your relationships with people, because of the way that it does alter your brain, all that it consists of, it's going to start to shift around a little bit. But the key question in this situation, I guess, would be that, okay, we typically see this from NFL players, and yet this man, Shane Devin Tamura, was a former high school football player. So how in the world did he attain this? And also, is it possible for people on lower levels to attain this? I guess those are the main 2 questions here. There's another big question here, but I'll get to that in a second. That is a little bit of the misconception, though. Again, like a lot of the popular cases out there deal with former NFL players having intense levels of CTE and ultimately going on to do pretty heinous things. Maybe with correlation to the condition, maybe not. Obviously, Aaron Hernandez stands out to a lot of people. Phillip Adams in 2021, remember that case? That stands out to a lot of people. Mike Webster is an individual that wasn't outlined here, but I remember that situation as well. They also kind of detail Dave Duerson here, and I don't know the exact quote, but essentially Duerson had a case where he essentially took his own life by, I guess, aiming shotgun at his neck. And he had a note saying that he wanted to get his brain checked. So he, in doing this, wanted to make sure that his head was preserved so that the brain wasn't further damaged and they could truly get a good look at it and see whether or not he had the condition. So obviously when you see that kind of stuff around, and it's not just football, they also say that hockey and boxers have dealt with this stuff too, which makes sense because, again, the impact is so constant in those sports. It's encouraged in a way. And when you are willing to go out there and do this consistently, you're definitely signing up to become one of the best to ever do it. But obviously only a few people can fill those kinds of statuses out in their careers. So a lot of other people are left to consistently do whatever it is that they can to make sure that they have a spot on the team and that they carve out their own distinct niche. So, like, for example, enforcers, the hard hitters out there in both boxing and football, they're naturally going to continue to put their bodies on the line just to make sure that they will have a permanent place on said roster or in said, I guess, venue when it comes to boxing. It's the trade-off that they agree to when they sign these contracts. But it does end up eventually costing you in some way. And that is the unfortunate dark side of it. However, what people fail to understand is that it can, in fact, start at a much, much younger age. As this quote states later in this New York Times article and other ones, quote, in a Boston University study released in 2023, researchers examined the brains of 152 contact sport athletes who died before turning 30 and whose families had concerns about brain disease. Of the athletes who were studied, 63, more than 40%, had evidence of CTE. Most had not played beyond the high school or college levels, and 48 of them had played football. The next section here also talks about a specific protein that, kind of displays a signature of CTE in somebody's brain. So it essentially works as, I guess, a kind of sign, a tell, when you go through imaging and stuff like that, that a person may have it. And again, similarly, when you're trying to ascend to the next level and trying to stake your claim in that, you're going to make those sacrifices consistently. So younger athletes can very much fall victim to the same thing. Even though small percentages pretty much every year will then make it to the college level, and then even smaller percentages will eventually get into the NFL. So, a lot of different people who end up not making it far in that aspect at all could very well be dealing with these things, and yet it's not known. Because as this next section also states here, apparently this said protein that could be found in people who have CTE, when you're dealing with younger athletes, it's going to be far less concentrated in a given area. So it's going to be very hard to map it out and get a good read on whether or not a person has CTE when they are much younger and an athlete compared to those who might be older. And again, just to get more numbers on it here, this article from NBC News at around the same time by Chan states that an estimated over 300,000 high school athletes in the country suffer concussion each year, the National Federation of State High School Association has previously said. End quote. So a stark number, and that is on an annual basis. And we're not even just talking about football here. A vast number of different contact sports, maybe even non-contact sports from time to time, even though obviously they are far, far against these kinds of practices, can still happen. And we're talking about that huge chunk of athletes. Again, like I said, only a small percentage of those athletes ever really get to a level higher than high school in their sports careers. So, at that point, any number of people may or may not be dealing with similar things, but to a somewhat lesser extent. And at that point, you have to consider, in extreme cases like this, you have to consider other factors here. Now, it was already mentioned that Shane Devin Tamura himself was dealing with mental health problems beforehand. And in fact, there is a bit more information here on some of what happened in his past before this even took place. There's multiple articles state, including this one from the AP by Offenhartz, that he had some pretty wild situations in the past. As this whole section states right here, Tamura had been twice hospitalized during mental health crises in recent years, officials said. During a 2022 incident, his mother told 911 dispatchers that her son was threatening to kill himself, added that he suffered from depression, concussion like sports concussion, chronic migraines, and insomnia. The following year, he was arrested on a misdemeanor trespassing charge after becoming agitated when he was told to leave a suburban Las Vegas casino. Prosecutors later dismissed the case. End quote. So this was a person who was clearly dealing with a lot beforehand, before this even happened. And again, as I was saying there, his family would not reach out in this situation at all. Because again, when you are associated with that stuff like that, it's going to be hard to shake it. They very well may still be in the grieving process at this point. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be for them to face the public and have to address all of these different things. But at the same time, again, there's just something to this notion that Tamura felt as though he had nowhere else to turn. And maybe that could have been his mind playing tricks on him, but I don't know. It's definitely unfortunate. And again, mental health is a real thing. You know, it is always important to check in on, honestly, anyone, especially those closest to you, of course, but anyone who you may feel is going through something like this. Because you just can never truly be sure. You have to confront that directly. You know, just going about it not to say in like an unsuspecting way, but you have to inquire. You have to always be on the nose there. Because if you just let it fester, especially in like severe cases of mental health issues, if you just let it fester and not say anything, well, it's like, And again, when factoring all of that in, even though some people may think that this was a CTE thing, and honestly, that might be the other major question that some people might have. Was this truly connected to CTE? Or was this a just full-on mental health issue being carried out in an extreme manner? And as this quote from Dr. Ann McKee kind of alludes to, essentially, she has said that little is known about the link between violent impulsive behavior and CTE, and that more studies must be done. So in reality, again, we have no idea. Like I did say with the Hernandez and Adams cases beforehand, I mean, they definitely had violent and impulsive behaviors in committing those crimes. But on a larger scale, on a more general basis, it would be very hard to assume that every single case of CTE correlated into some form of extreme violence and, I guess, more erratic, impulsive behaviors. It's hard to really say that right now until they get more information and more data on it over time. One with these past struggles that Tamara was facing while he wasn't alive could say that, I mean, this was largely a situation of just unchecked mental health issues leading into something truly, truly tragic. And until more information comes out about this on a wide-scale basis in the long run, I mean, that's kind of how you would have to view it. Like, you again, you never want to assume, but, you know, a lot of the tendencies from Tamara, if you're looking at those misdemeanors, if you're looking at that incident a few years back, and if you're looking at all that led to him driving all the way from Nevada to New York, legitimately loaded up on weapons without being stopped a single time, as well, as I also said in that report when I first covered it, from one of the articles there. That's certainly, again, you can never truly know what's in a person's heart, and I won't make the mistake of saying that you wouldn't typically see that in, I guess, a normal case. But it's all out there. It's all been documented at this point that this was an individual dealing with a heavy amount of weight in his life. This could have been years of pent-up stuff, or it could have taken a single moment for him with something that he might have experienced for him to be pushed over the edge. And one of the two could have led him to do what he did on that night in July, unfortunately. Again, still an unfortunate case. It does provide a little bit of clarity, but not that much. Because what does the rest of the road look like after this, to be honest? What do things look like down the line? How do high schools, again, with that stark number of concussions happening per year, how do they try to further regulate these things in order to prevent these kinds of issues in the long run? Is it even something that can be prevented with the nature of the sport? How would pro leagues have to play a factor in maybe assisting some of these high schools to, crack down on these things? And in a way, we are seeing the NFL do that with promoting more flag football. Obviously, flag football is going to be an Olympic sport, so you're going to get a massive amount of attention there. But when it comes to tackle football, in these high school settings, this could be a case, especially with it being one that made national headlines, that poses as a wake-up call for a potential change of any kind, honestly, in that specific realm of the sport. Because at the end of the day, even when you're done playing football, a lot of these kids and a lot of these young adults have aspirations. Well, okay. A good balance, I should say, of kids have aspirations and dreams to conduct their lives in other ways, in other ventures beyond football. And even for those who might see themselves playing football as a forever sport, something that they have the full desire to invest in all of their time, all of their energy into that sport or any sport that they have passion for and nothing else. Even then, you want to make sure that their brains are intact. And that when they're done, whether they may want to or not, they can still be of vital, a vital presence to those that they care about. A functioning presence to those that they may be trying to help out in terms of work or their respective lines of work. I don't know. It can definitely be a violent game. But even with that being the case, if they are so willing to, you should try to do as much as you can to preserve this idea of them having somewhat peaceful lives. And, again, it's going to be hard to attain that for everybody, but, that's got to be worth something. For a good number of people, I would think. Alright, moving back into some injury news. Kene Nwangwu would be out of the game against the Dolphins with a hamstring injury. The Browns would conduct a trade. They would send a 2027 late round pick to the Texans in exchange for Cam Robinson and a swap of a different 2027 late round pick. I guess I can understand why. Like, they're just trying to make cost-cutting moves as best as they can. You're still cap-strapped with bucking Deshaun Watson on your roster, but your line is definitely going to need some help. They need reinforcements because to this point, haven't heard anything about Jedrick Wills Jr. He's still hurt and he's still a free agent. So it might look as though the Browns aren't really all that invested in re-signing him. And I guess with his injury history, don't know if I can really blame them for that. You also have Dylan Gabriel coming in, and even though he's one of the older rookies, this is still a guy who's going to have his first start in the NFL, and you want to make sure that he can make it to the next fucking week without literally crumbling down on the field because he's just getting bum rushed on every single play. Cam Robinson is a decent lineman at best, but I feel like they'd be trying to utilize him as a blindside blocker here. Just a temporary fix on a problem that they are going to have to definitely look to solve through something like the draft. Maybe even this year. If they're bad enough and if they can find that there's a good enough prospect around that range to invest in. Alright, the Commanders would sign Robbie Anderson to their practice squad. Though, again, with no real update on what things look like for Terry McLaurin, I do kind of get it. Oh yeah, also, the Seahawks around this time, they have a huge slew of decisions ahead of them. And it centers around the fact that teams around the NFL are looking into Tariq Woolen as a potential trade target prior to the upcoming trade deadline in about a month or so from now. And I can't lie to you, it would be so tough to see Tariq Woolen, after all this time, leave the team in that way. It would be tough. But at the same time, this season has not looked great for him so far. For a defense that is necessarily, like, they've been pretty fucking great as a defense. But Tariq Woolen, it's gotten to a point where literally, like I said, in the Seahawks-Cardinals game, they can't even trust him to match up against Marvin Harrison Jr., even though he matches him perfectly in size. They have situations where he's just consistently been undisciplined and lackadaisical on defense. And whether it be a few plays in that Cardinals game or the game-winning sequence with catches by Ricky Pearsall or Jake Tonjes in week 1, and then, again, decent work in week 2, but still just sloppy execution. Like, I really don't know if he would remain there. And the fact that they're already trusting Josh Jobe over him right now, like, he's got some serious work to do. And I'll tell you, he has to lock in. Prove to the Seahawks brass that, in these next few games, you still have elite talent and elite ability within you to legitimately cover and legitimately get physical with the receivers that you're covering. Obviously not to foul, but to legitimately pose a threat to quarterbacks who might be throwing your way or to receivers who feel as though they can just easily attack you every time they have a run against you. Because the speed, love the speed from Tariq Woolen, but that can only get you so far if you're not harnessing it and if you're not offsetting that with other skills in different facets of playing the cornerback position. To solely rely on speed as a cornerback is not going to lead to a ton of success. You got to have a good balance of it all, or you're not going to last. So as much as I would like him to stick around and see it through with the team, if he doesn't play well, that would just give the Seahawks even more incentive to move on from him. Now, that would make them relatively short at cornerback. But the fact that you not only have Devin Witherspoon, which of course, obviously, Josh Jobe, and also they brought in Darian Kendrick because of a different injury to one of our cornerbacks. And he has also gained more trust from this unit, as Tariq Woolen has seen his snaps drop precipitously. It's just not a good sign right now. There's still room to turn it around, but I can't necessarily be surprised at a report like that. The Bills would sign Mitch Wishnowsky because Cameron Johnston is currently injured right now. Reliable enough punter, so that makes sense. Trey Benson would miss at least the next 4 games. He has a hamstring injury, so they placed him on IR. Hopefully he gets better and can recover from that swiftly and efficiently, but for the Cardinals as well, now you're down Connor and Benson. Those are your top 2 guys. DeMericado's got to be the next man up, but then who else are you going to try to sign? They got to look for yet another backup plan, because they don't have enough in their room right now to really compete with some of the other, I guess, dominant rushing teams in the conference of the NFC, ironically enough. Few retirements. Shaq Leonard would retire from the NFL yesterday, and the Colts would also place Xavien Howard on the retired reserve list, with him officially calling it a career yesterday as well. 2 guys who, honestly, like, I've covered both of them. We know that they had pretty good, like, short primes. And Xavien Howard, for a while, was one of the better cornerbacks in the league. But again, between a combination of age and really just a lot of crazy stuff going on, I don't know. He just kind of phased out of the league. Colts would sign him in the offseason and give him a little bit of burn, but I suppose that, he just wasn't really feeling playing all that much anymore. In fact, I did come across a post from him, and I guess it was just kind of a proper send-off in his viewpoint. He was talking about how it felt, I guess, last year to spend time with his family, his wife, his children, and, tend to all their different life experiences as a parent. He found value in that, and he alluded to this idea that he would like to have that feeling again consistently, because football, while it has been pretty good for him, he is not at a point anymore where he feels like he can get that much more out of it. And for any player, even for a guy in Shaq Leonard who had been trying so hard to hold on, I guess, even though his better years were a little bit behind him and he also had taken a few steps back. When a player feels like they don't have anything to offer the game anymore, you'll usually see them bow out. I guess you could say that these two guys kind of fought it off for the longest time. But especially with Xavien Howard being vocal about it. You know, sooner rather than later, he had to come to the realization that there is simply more to the story than just a football career. You know, there's so much other things to do with the time that he still has right now, and Shaq Leonard for that matter as well. And they want to take advantage of it. Full stop. I don't really know, and I guess I can't really speculate on their Hall of Fame chances right now. I'm not going to do that necessarily. But they will both go down as some pretty good players at their respective positions. For Shaq Leonard, maybe for at least a few solid years. And for Xavien Howard, I mean, for the opening of his career down to at least like the 2022 season, I would believe. Simply put, one of the better corners in the NFL during that time. No question about that. Dolphins and Colts fans alike are going to forever remember those guys. Myles Garrett would be designated week to week. He's currently dealing with an ankle injury, and he didn't practice on Wednesday. Travon Walker is also week to week with a wrist injury, and he did not practice yesterday as well. Anything else? Oh yeah, there is a situation involving Dolphins assistant coach Ryan Crow. Apparently, he was arrested and accused of battery charges against his girlfriend in August, as this says right here. But the prosecutors in Broward County are not going to press or pursue charges, rather. My thing is this: between this, allegedly, and between the Quinshon Judkins case, which is now solved, of course, or at least just kind of done, I guess. Why is something always going down in Broward County when it comes to shit like this? It's a little wild to me. But anyways, that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.